Welcome back to the county seat. We are online now on our website for an extended conversation with Congressman Rob Bishop. Congressman, you mentioned at the very tail end of our on-air program the equal access to justice and its impact it has on farmers. It also seems to have a very positive impact on some rather extreme environmental groups who tap that program to further their ends at the detriment of the traditional users of the land and the people who rely on the western lands for a living. I was very curious about that and find out what your thoughts are about it.
No, equal access to justice, which sounds wonderful, doesn't it? How can you be opposed to equal access to justice, or EJA, is probably one of the most abused programs the federal government has started. And the reason for that abuse is twofold. The first is the federal government does not keep track of how much money we're spending on that. No one knows how much has been asked of that fund, how much has been paid out of that fund, how much has been put into that fund. So the first thing that we are asking is for a general accounting of what actually has gone out in the past and in the future. So we want to try and control that. The second deals with the definitions of what you do to tap into that fund. For some reason, the way it has been defined, if you are on a nonprofit entity, even though you're making millions of dollars in your entity, you are simply one of those poor people that should be compensated for suing the federal government. If, on the other hand, you are a land-rich and money-poor rancher, which most of them are, the total assets of your ranch is counted against you. Therefore, you don't qualify to get into any of that funds. So yeah, it has been used as a moneymaker for certain special interest groups who can qualify by the definitions of the Act. So one of the things we also want to do is change the way we do the definitions once we have a firm handle on how much money is actually being spent and how much money is going out of that fund. We think simply the EJA is being used to pad the accounts of certain special interest groups, but it is definitely detrimental to anyone who works on the land, whose money is tied up in the land and doesn't actually have spare cash to defend themselves in court, but they need to. It's just an unfair playing balance, and that's a lousy way of saying it. It's an unlevel playing field.
Oh, more so than... Do you think that was the intention ever? Do you think they intended it to help the ranchers in the way it... Was it rulemaking or actually in the legislative language that it went awry?
Now, this is just another screw-up that happens in government when you have a good idea of saying, yeah, if somebody is poor, they should be able to sue, and they shouldn't have to be put at a disadvantage just because they don't have money. But in the application of it has been so skewed that this now becomes a revenue producer for certain groups, and the very people who need to defend themselves are the ones who can't access it because of the definitions of how we develop total wealth, or how we define total wealth.
So basically, in a scenario, a rancher is having a problem with the federal government. He thinks he's being unfairly handled as far as grazing permits or allocations or water or any of these issues, and so he wants to sue the government. He has to scrape up cash.
He's on his own.
He has to go get a second mortgage to get it. And then he files the lawsuit, and conceivably an environmental group can come tap that fund and file something counter to that as a friend of the court and actually use the fund against the guy who's seeking relief. Is that a realistic scenario?
That happens. Or the other, and I think probably more practical, is a special interest group files a lawsuit against the government, which would have a negative impact on the rancher.
And he can't join
the rancher, to try and defend himself, has to come up with cash on his own, and that's also an unfair playing field. And that's not the way that's not why this thing was intended in the first place. It's just the reality of what has taken place.
How hard is it to fix stuff like that?
Obviously a difficult time because we're in the second year of trying to work with that. This is, once again, where Representative Loomis from Wyoming is taking the lead. She sponsored the first bill to ask for transparency, so we can find out. She will take the lead, but we will work with her as part of the Western Caucus. All of those of us in the West will work together to try and bring some fairness with this. We made some progress in the appropriation bill last year, in which we stopped some of the automatic funding for this until we got some answers. We can use that approach as well. And in that realm, it's a little bit fairer we have a little bit greater clout in being able to do some things. But what we really need to do is simply rewrite the law so this unintended consequence does not take place. It hurts people who make a living from the land and helps people who oftentimes are in air-conditioned offices in New York making big money, and this becomes a revenue producer for them. And it's not, people should not be taxed for that kind of an environment.
I agree. Thank you so much for taking the time with us. As always, we appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in on the County Seat on the website. Be sure to check this website out often. Quite often we will have an extended conversation with somebody that has been a guest on the TV show. Thank you for participating. Participate actively in your local government. It is the one that makes the most difference in your life. We'll see you next week.